Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce my lifelong friend and colleague, Dr. Robert Martin, the former CTO of Bell Labs and the corporate officer in charge of the software business at Bellcore. He has chaired and served on a number of influential governmental, industrial, and startup company advisory boards. And he has managed many thousand people software development organizations at Bell Labs and Bellcore. Under his tenure, he improved the quality of the software produced by the organizations he managed by more than a factor of 10. A very non-trivial achievement in software, I might add. I first met Bob at a computer science research conference in Austin, Texas, where we were both presenting research papers based on our PhD theses. Bob had just gotten his PhD from MIT and I from Princeton. We had both just joined Bell Labs. Bob in the development area and I in research. During a conference intermission, we both participated in a water polo game in the hotel swimming pool. As a result of that water polo game, we and our families became lifelong friends. A pickup water polo game is a rather unusual way to begin a lifelong friendship, but I should mention that when Bob was an undergraduate at Brown University, he was a star swimmer on the Brown varsity team and set swimming records that would not be broken for more than a decade. I soon discovered that whatever Bob sets out to do, he would do it at the highest level of competence. Throughout his life, he has amply demonstrated this determination for excellence in software, sailing, skiing, photography, and bridge. Bob is the best software development manager I know. When I was a professor of computer science at Columbia, I would frequently invite Bob to speak in my programming languages class about effective software management techniques. If you've ever made a telephone call, you have used network management software developed by Bob and the organizations he managed. In the 1980s, when I was heading the Computing Sciences Research Center at Bell Labs, Bjorn Stroustrup invented the C++ programming language. At that time, Bob was in charge of software at Bell Labs, and he immediately recognized the potential value of C++ as an effective object-oriented systems programming language. He decided to commercialize C++ as an AT&T product. Because of that decision, C++ became the dominant object-oriented systems programming language in industry, science, and even in outer space. For example, the Microsoft Windows operating system is written in C++. The software used by the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Europe is written in C++. And the software in NASA's lunar rovers is written in C++. A year ago, when Mitch first asked me to be the monthly program chair for January 2021, I initially asked Bob whether he'd be willing to give a talk to the old guard on software. However, during 2020, Bob began compiling a notebook summarizing thousands of published research papers and articles that he had read on SARS-CoV-2 virus and the societal behavior of people during pandemics. When I read his notes, I immediately thought a talk by Bob on COVID-19 would be far more interesting and relevant today than a talk on software. So I asked Bob whether he'd be willing to talk about COVID-19. Bob graciously said yes. So here's Bob Martin, who will talk about what he has learned about COVID-19 and the societal behaviors it has engendered. Bob, the screen is yours.
Okay. Let's see. Am I showing on the screen to everybody? I hope so. I'm seeing Alfie.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, first, I'd like to thank the old guard for asking me to speak. You learn something by reading, you learn more by writing, and you learn a heck of a lot more when you have to talk about it. You always see the great wisdom in having a wonderful friend of 53 years and introduce you. Our families truly have been 53-year-old, not lifelong friends, but long friends nonetheless. a minor correction in the wonderful note that was sent out. Unfortunately, I never worked for MITRE, did work for a bunch of other people, but not MITRE. And then one last comment before I start. I'd like to reinforce Ron's suggestion that people call friends who are alone. Loneliness by itself advances death, particularly in men. So those phone calls are very, very important. Okay. Okay, as much as you can, minimize the pictures that you see of people watching, particularly me, because the slides are going to fill the screen. There are several ways to do it, but you probably want to do that. The reason for the title will become clear shortly. The way I got into this is we all have these COVID-19 days. We're trying to figure out what to do. And I realized we were in the middle of one of these world disruptions, of which each generation has roughly 3. And so I decided to study it. And I read about 3,500 papers from about 250 different journals. By the way, there are about 125,000 listed on the World Health Organization website. Okay, this is the outline. I think it's pretty clear what I'm going to cover, but some point on the acronyms, which are shown at the bottom. One, the name of the virus describes the illness. We'll get into that illness quite a bit because it is a severe acute respiratory illness. COVID-19 is the disease it causes. It's a coronavirus, which we'll talk about, that happened in 2019. 2 will become exceedingly important.
I'll just quick do this there.
There we go. Okay, now it is a very minor pandemic in historic terms. Look particularly at the Bubonic Plague. And with today's population, it would kill roughly half everybody alive. Smallpox wiped out 90% of Native Americans. Look at COVID-19 in red, way down the list. It's peanuts as compared to these other guys. Those deaths are my guess at where it might end up. Look also at the other 2 pandemics at the very bottom, MERS and SARS, with a very small number of deaths. That will come important in a moment. Now, the reason it roared, it's a huge economic disruption. You see the 2 great debt bubbles of all times, the Great Depression and the Great Recession. Look particularly at the stimulus line. So far on COVID-19, we have committed 14.3% of the GDP. Federal taxes are about 12.9% to stimulus. That's more than the Great Depression. It's been very uneven. Small business and low income hit hard. Certain market sectors also hit very hard. To get an idea of the size of the tech stock boom, for the first time, the S&P 500 tech stock segments are worth more than all European stocks. This is the, excuse me, TSA checkpoint data. You see 2019 compared to 2020. Sorry, the more frightening numbers are the ones on the right. As you see the travel peaks in the week before Thanksgiving, and even more frighteningly on the week before and after Christmas and 3 days after that. This portends terribly for future cases and deaths. Part of the reason people aren't flying, of course, is it's not nearly as much fun to sneak a peek. Those are the stewardesses on the Chinese airlines. Okay, we'll talk about the virus. how it spreads, the science, but it's really foggy. Why is it so deadly? And we talk a bit about the mutations. People are quite sure from genetic analysis that the virus came from a combination of a horseshoe bat and a pangolin. They believe they're exactly these. They also believe it did not happen by eating something at the wet market. Now, that little tiny virus, details we'll get into later, spread astoundingly quickly. There's suspected cases back in 2012 that are being investigated now. The first reported case was in Wuhan, China in 2019. Interestingly, blood tests showed that it was in France and Italy in September and California in December. January went to there, February there, March there, April through November there, and December to Antarctica. You can get an idea how quickly it spread and the rate of deaths, unusually linear, by the way. No model does that projection. It basically has covered all but about 4 small island countries in the world. Compare that to the Spanish flu. As an aside, my wife's grandparents on her father's side died in the Spanish flu, and he and his 9 siblings were spread around to orphanages and relatives. You know, each death has a very sad story. Lots more deaths, almost an order of magnitude more than I'm forecasting. And it took 18 months to spread. There weren't airplanes. Okay, what is it? Well, it's a virus. That means it isn't alive. It hijacks a lot of our stuff. It's a coronavirus, just like MERS, SARS, dengue fever, Zika, some flus and colds. It's called a coronavirus because there are these little spikes that you'll see shortly that protrude out of it. It is really tiny. 13 trillion of them would fit in a grain of salt. 1 to 100 trillion end up in our bodies, don't weigh that much. Its atomic structure is exceedingly well known. It has RNA, a single strand. We have DNA, 2 strands. Its RNA is exactly the form of our messenger RNA. It's ready to be made into proteins. As you can see, it is much smaller than our DNA, about 1/100th the size. The structure is the same, identical to all other coronaviruses, and it has 29 proteins that differ little with other coronaviruses. Just like us, a base pair change here or there can make a big difference. Numbers that will come up, and you've probably heard about, 1 or not. That's how many people a typical person will infect in a typical environment, whatever the heck typical means. We'll talk about that more later. The case fatality rate is the percent of confirmed cases. A very important point, not infected, but confirmed. You have to have a test or die from it in the US to count. I mentioned these diseases earlier when I was describing the mouse and their ability to spread and how deadly they are. SARS doesn't look that bad. So why has it killed so many more people than MERS and SARS? The uncertainty range, by the way, is because it is going up with a mutation that I'll describe shortly. Okay, these are the differences. First, in SARS, an estimated 59% of the cases result from people who do not have symptoms. They're either asymptomatic, that means they never develop symptoms, or they're pre-symptomatic, that means they will develop symptoms, but they've been infectious for a bit before. Notice MERS and SARS, there are no asymptomatic cases, nor pre-symptomatic, and finally, those 2 diseases are most infectious, late in the illness when people are already in the hospital. So the issue is not only the ability to spread, but how it spreads. Another way to look at that is a chart I put together comparing those two parameters in various viruses. And look at COVID-19 tucked down at the bottom, just above the flu. Pardon me. This will be the only biochemistry, but there are two terms you've heard a lot about. One is the spike protein, and the other is the ACE2 receptor. Boy, sorry. The ACE2 receptor is a protein that sticks through our cell. I'll talk about it a little bit more later. The spike protein sticks out of the SARS-2 virus. That gives it this crown look. It has been described as having two pieces. The way it connects is with a little area called the receptor binding domain, and it's the target of all the particle vaccines. This is exactly what they're going after. And it forms a single hydrogen bomb, just one. But when it gets there, it's stuck. So what it does is it hijacks some of our proteins to cut the spike protein in half so it can snuggle over and enter our cell just the way nutrients do. It is mutating. It's following the evolutionary handbook. Lots of sequences from 140 different countries, lots of different genomes. The spike protein alone has had 4,517 different changes. By the way, there are about 3,000 papers on the spike protein. Several of the mutations have been quite scary. One took over the world in 3 months. A March one in South Africa appears to evade one of the FDA-approved monoclonal antibodies. The reason I mentioned the August Nigerian one, it's spreading, and its mutation showed up in the UK mutation that I think you've been hearing about that probably came up the same way that our resistance to antibodies came up, drug-induced headway. You see at the bottom the huge growth rate in the UK that is the result of this mutation. This mutation is in the US. Okay, the disease. It's a disease of the immune system influenced by comorbidities and has great impact on the socioeconomic disadvantaged. Okay, the receptor, ACE2, defined at the bottom. There's a hormone, you see the name there, that it converts. It's used to control blood pressure. You see it's all over the body. It's every place. And because of that, and I'll discuss some of these illnesses just a little bit more later, you see everything that can happen to the body. It basically destroys the body. Okay, this is how it progresses. It enters, it goes through a quiet incubation period. It then becomes infectious and then is non-infectious, but you can still test positive. Notice the scale there is exponential, and you see the days at the top. What I described earlier, that some people are pre-symptomatic and become asymptomatic. Some people are asymptomatic and they stay asymptomatic. And that red is that dangerous period where the symptomatic people also can spread it. Basically, what is happening is the immune system, we have two kinds. The innate, that's the standard one, defends the same way against everything. And the adaptive, that's one that is learned. It's learned from things like antibodies. That's why you want a vaccine. It goes through a phase where it's just doing its same old thing. When the virus comes in, it drives it to an underactive state which allows this explosive replication. It then becomes overactive. There are actually lots of places that the virus binds. I just described ACE2. The cytokine in the cytokine storm is the real danger. Cytokines are little signaling molecules. They're just like they're proteins. They're just like hormones. We have 100 billion of them in our bodies. When this thing hits, certain ones of them go out by a factor of 1,000. The virus is diabolical, has an astounding biochemistry. Like all viruses, it hijacks our protein building system. It steals our amino acids and lipids. It inhibits and hides from our immune system. It disrupts our DNA copying to favor itself and inserts part of itself in our DNA, just like HIV, and it does many other horrible things. Okay, this is the disease progression for the 0.8% in the US of people who died from COVID-19. Notice the day scale on the bottom matches that on the top. The progression is very uneven. This is typical. Two very important things to see from this chart, which I mentioned a bit earlier. It impacts many, many parts of the body. And the cause of the death is multi-organ failure. Respiratory failure, that's why it's called SARS, is almost always there. But there are many other kinds of failure. It's just a terrible disease. Symptoms are all over the place. This is a scale with log odds. So 1 means 10 times likely or not in a 95% confidence interval. On the left is what people report, is on the right what the primary doctor reports. And these symptoms differ by sex and age. So you can't say just, I had this symptom in this system, therefore I have it. That's not enough. Comorbidities. The reason you see this fat mouse is for 5 months, they fattened up mice to see whether obesity really did impact COVID death. And yes, it does. It is second behind age, especially if people are frail, and being a major comorbidity. And a comorbidity means you got something else which influences something else. Other big ones are sex, diabetes, if it's untreated, race, which is difficult to pull apart because the ones above it are associated with it. And very interestingly, air pollution. One of the sad things is the impairments from the disease are long lasting. We don't know how long because the disease hasn't been around long enough. But 1/3 of the people who have the disease have lasting at least several months, some mental impairment. You really don't want to get this thing. Fortunately, things are getting better. I've been gathering CDC data for the last few months to be able to produce this chart. And if you look at the case fatality rate in March through the end of the November, it was 2.47% overall. I'll have more to say about what it was before then later. From November 4th to 27th, it dropped to 0.79. That's the number I used before, 0.8. From December 1st to December 31st, after the Thanksgiving travel and Thanksgiving get-togethers, it jumped up. When hospitals are full, they don't do as well. It's going to get worse. Okay, as I said, there's socioeconomic impacts. Look at the relative infection rate of non-white versus white. Excess deaths. What excess deaths means are those deaths greater than last year, not attributable to COVID. Again, impacts. Economic problems, huge differences. Education impact. The impact of remote education, if you don't have remote education, is just brutal. Low-income people are losing more than a year's education. They're retrogressing. Therapeutics. You don't want to be either the two animals on the left, given all the tests we're running on them. The one on the right, the llama, actually is pretty cool in that a very good neutralizing antibody was found from one named Cora. Finding them is a real needle in a haystack. At the end of the year, there were over 2,500 therapeutic trials taking place around the world in lots of different categories. It's been a really twisted path. Many of the drugs for SARS and MERS were, of course, tested. That didn't work. Subtle differences, as we've said before, make big changes. There are lots of small trials trying everything: snake venom, shell dust. Some are very, very exciting. Conflicting results are common. One day I read 3 results on the same therapeutic. One said it's great. One said it's not so good. The other said it's terrible. So the common recommendation is always a larger trial. The next ones, by the way, are going to be fantastic. They are really looking good because the science behind them is spectacular. Diverse attacks, they're well informed. I'll talk a little bit more about that later with vaccines. Okay, treatment. I said I'd talk more about case fatality rates. This was a study done at NYU Langone based on month of admission. You see how terrible the case fatality rates were in March and how quickly they've come down. Further, hospital stays are getting shorter. Hospital quality is improving. You see 2 studies by the same people, same journal, comparing the case fatality rate from January through April as compared to May through June. Everybody got better. The best is still much better than the worst. The big determinant is the number of ICU beds. Do not go to a hospital with a small number of ICU beds. Okay, this is what I'd do if I got exposed. I'd get a PCR, not an antigen test. I'll describe why in a bit. Symptoms immediately, just exposed, I'd wait 5 days. Isolate, I'd do my own contact tracing. You'll see why in a moment. I'd see my doctor, find the hospital, make sure they have a particular drug, get the paperwork out of the hospital, and immediately go there to get assessed by an expert, and at a minimum, get on their patient list. Get everything out of the way you can. Early treatment, if it goes south, is crucial. Okay, how do you avoid catching it? Well, first, behavior really matters. These are the cases per million in the US and Europe. I picked Europe because they're a democracy like us, and early on, people were saying we had a lot of cases because we're a freedom-loving democracy. But look at the difference of cases per million on a 7-day average of how we and Europe responded when things went south. Europe corrected and we didn't, and still don't. The consequences of that, if we had behaved like Europe, we'd have 70,000 fewer deaths. We're only 4% of the world's population and about a quarter of their cases. Our behavior is largely responsible for the US cases doubling in the last 2 months of last year, and Thanksgiving and Christmas aftermath bloodbath. It's very sad. Okay, avoid getting infected. The rabbit on the left gets infected. Dogs and cats get infected and they spread it. If you want a pet, get a pig. They don't get infected. Okay, the way it spreads is through aerosol transmission. There's a little bit by hand to mouth, nose, or eyes. You know, we touch our faces quite commonly. None by digested food, none by sex. And it's probably because everybody's following the New York Health Department's website recommendation, which is the best sex is self-sex. Just be sure to wash your hands 20 seconds before and after. A small amount of viral load, keep that 100 in the back of your mind, can cause infection. Disease severity follows viral load. Wear a mask. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Okay, the way it spreads. Look at the scale on the top, 24 feet. Breathing isn't too bad. Just a few virus particles. Look at a sneeze. Goes 20 feet and up to 200 million viral particles. Super spreaders, which we'll talk about shortly, those people who spread a lot, are even worse. And by the way, talking and singing even more so is really worse. So wear a great mask, socially distance. Okay, what a super spreader is for COVID-19, or I'm sorry, for SARS-CoV-2 with an R naught of 2.5 is 8 people being infected by a person or at an event. That's the 99% case, assuming a binomial distribution. Well, that isn't the distribution. It's a negative binomial. And 20% of the people cause 80% of the infections, as in almost all viral infections. The way infections spread is the first interregional by flight. I'll show you an interesting case later. Then there's a super spreading event, one of these where it spreads to a lot of people. But most of the spreading happens in households and apartment buildings. Now, these points of interest where super spreading can occur, there are lots of opportunities, as you can see from this list. I'll talk about bars in a bit. Look at nursing homes. Less than 1% of the population, 39% of the deaths. Yes, they should have been vaccinated first. Bars, terrible places. Everything is wrong about them. If you stay 2 hours at a bar that has 12 square feet per person, then assuming a 2% infection rate, which is what is taking place now, say you go 4 times, you have an 80% chance of getting infected. That's why the bars are closed or should be closed. Okay, this is a study that it was just listed on the CDC site like yesterday. They say it's going to be published in March. This was a flight from Dubai to New Zealand, 18 hours. All the passengers were pre-tested. It spread on the flight from passengers A and B to those other people. Some got it on the flight. One of them got it from their companion later. This was their final destination. They went all over the world. And they weren't diagnosed immediately. So that's how it spreads. Masks. The right mask makes a huge difference. If there's one message I could get across in this talk, get an N95 mask. Top left, no mask. Top right, N95. Surgical is pretty good. Cloth, really not very good. If you put something in between, cloth gets a little bit better. Get an N95. Okay, where is it safe? On the right, you see the common sense things where it's safe on both event and circumstance. On the left is a really interesting survey from the New York Times in November. I'm sorry, it was published in December. And it's what 700 epidemiologists did. You can see they did different stuff. One thing, if you look at the stuff on the right that is in red, you really did see that they did avoid those things. Another interesting point is on the bottom. Less than a third would change their behavior after being vaccinated, and half would wait until at least 70%. We'll get to that 70% number in just a second. Okay, testing. There are two kinds of tests, diagnostic and past infection. The ones I'm first showing are the PCR. It's a medical test. The antibody test is a past infection. You see the same curve of the virus growing and shrinking that I showed before. And you see roughly when the nucleic acid test is effective and roughly when the antibody test is effective. The PCR test is that nasal swab that should hurt, checks for a piece of the virus. It has false negatives. The false negative rate is highly dependent on the particular test, particular testing equipment that's used. It can be up to 73% false negative on one of the FDA approved tests. The antibody test can have false positives. There's another diagnostic test best used for surveillance. It has more false negative, though this rapid test is pretty good from Abbott. And it is excellent if you're highly infectious. It's very fast. Other tests, dogs in airports detect it sooner than a PCR test. Likewise, wastewater, good at college dorms, detects it sooner. So it's a good statistical test. You see some others that are being worked on. Okay, contact tracing. This is another tool of how to avoid it. U is the single dot. You're infected. You find out and you call all your contacts. By the time you called them, you'd infected one person who happened to be a super spreader. Contact tracing just clips those contacts. You go backwards because you want to talk to the people who might have infected you so they can clip their forward going. Cannot work now in the US. Too many people are infected. This is how many contact tracers we would need. We have 50,000. You got to do it yourself. So how about apps? The way an app works is just when smartphones get close to one another. You know, Bluetooth says, hey, I see you. Well, of course, the US wasn't smart enough to have one. So we only have 18 states in the District of Columbia by the end of the year. But by the way, they're not used. In New Jersey, only 5% of the people have downloaded the app and very few people check in. So they're limited, but they have some important uses. Manual, great in colleges and in the pandemic endgame. Apps, spectacular in colleges and in businesses. Lockdowns, this is the last tool. You can see what happened in New York and Seattle. You know, all lockdowns are rigid enforcement of everything I've talked about. Contacts dropped like a rock. The interesting part of the study is if New York had done this a week sooner, it'd have been a third the deaths. A week later, twice the deaths. So this is not a time to be cautious. Okay, how people behave. We all trade off safety and quality of life. You know, Al and I skied and we sailed. You know, what sane person would do either of those? The forces on us today are virtually, what can we do? Who's your authority figure? Is it Fauci or Trump? What's your knowledge? Do you know a lot about it or not much? Do you have enough money to hang out? How tired are you getting of these COVID-19 days? Us versus them is a biological cause. Tribes survive better than individuals. Sadly, the political chasm has made a big difference. Republicans have been behaving very, very differently than Democrats, and it shows in their case and death rates. The stress is on us, huge uncertainty, immense uncertainty. This is the economic uncertainty index, and it measures all kinds of economic uncertainty. Look at COVID. Unbelievable as compared to all previous ones. Fear is up. These are the firearms permit checks. You don't know how many firearms are purchased, just whether somebody got a permit. They're up 40% year over year. Okay, virtual work has doubled. You know, it's just astounding. Medicine, telemedicine is way up. Again, it's one of these socioeconomic differences. However, those devices are proprietary. They're soon going to be non-proprietary ones. They can do everything that a doctor can do, visit, other than feel your belly and look down your throat. Foot traffic changed in an unexpected way. It is up at the hardware stores. We're home. We have nothing to do. We're hunting for projects. Savings rate, all-time high, all income groups. Drive-in theaters are back. Walmart opened a bunch. A weird one, soccer foul calling changed. The home team advantage shrunk. The ref wasn't worried about being lynched, so became more honest. Wackadoodles are out there. The recommendations to eat or cow dung or drink cow urine. Treatments, the president of Belarus said, drink vodka, that'll cure it. People believe that Disney Plus and Netflix caused it to increase their revenues. My favorite one is that it was caused by Bill Gates, so he could put microchips in the vaccine so they could be tracked by 5G. 24% of the Republicans believe that in a Gallup poll. Big gatherings continued to happen. You know, the motorcycle rally, the Trump rallies, Black Lives Matter protests, the Notre Dame, Clemson game. After the rallies, the motorcycle rally and the Trump rallies, case rates and hospitalization rates shot up. Look what happened after the Black Lives Matter protest in Notre Dame. Nothing. Look at the difference of the pictures. One group had masks, the other didn't. They're more comfortable in an intubation tube or a coffin. Wear them. Okay, how it ends. Okay, what herd immunity means is basically enough people can't get it from somebody else. Early on, a few people can spread it to a lot of people. A little bit later, it slows, and at the end, it doesn't spread very much. The reason for the question mark will come up in a bit. Now, you've heard the 70% number. First, it goes up a bit because of our not going up. But I think the more interesting thing is if you look at the county level, herd immunity differs in every county according to how many infections they've had and what their population density is. So be very careful on the numbers. Some people said, well, come on, let's just let everybody get the disease. Sweden tried it. And look what happened to their relative death rate as compared to Norway's. It shot up. They agreed it was a failure and have stopped it. Say we had no vaccinations. We probably had 2 million more US deaths and 60 million more world deaths. It's going to take a while before herd immunity sets in. If 50% of the people are vaccinated, about another 9 months after the vaccinations. If 75%, about another 4 months. So we could get it in the end of the summer, but not as many people as we would hope are willing to take the vaccine, particularly people of color and Republicans. So we need a lot of work to get the vaccine drumbeat happening. Vaccines. The reason the shark is here is we're going to kill 500,000 of them for their livers for a chemical we put in vaccines. Okay, the vaccines have been astounding, as you've all read, blazingly fast. Moderna had their protein 1 day after the vaccine was sequenced. The testable vaccine, 42 days, and US approved vaccines in 11 months. Unbelievably good. 95% effectiveness, no deaths, good for the old folks too. Challenges, as we've seen, are very complex. Temperature is really tough for the mRNA vaccines, which are the Moderna and Pfizer ones. Look at the logistics, even if it were a single dose. Most of them require 2. It takes 8,000 747s. Questions. Should we take more than one? When, not if, will a booster be needed? Moderna today said a year a booster will probably be needed. Are they going to work for you? Will they be mutation resistant? Will they stop disease spread? I'm going to talk about both of those points next. Some really exciting second generation vaccines being worked on, be available in about 7 months or so. They're inhaled, and that's good because they protect the upper and the lower respiratory tracts. The lower ones definitely, the injector ones definitely protect the lower, but not necessarily the upper. That's why we might spread it after we're vaccinated. Got to wear the mask. The attacks are going to be better. The science understanding what to attack is astounding. They know exactly what part of the receptor binding domain, based on a paper 2 days ago, to go after. It doesn't mutate. Okay, who gets it? Should the retired, wealthy old folks who can hang out get it? Or how about the working poor and middle-aged? How about the countries? Rich folks are overbuying. World Health Organization has money for only 10% of the low-income folks. Equitable distribution would double lives saved. Should we enforce it? Polls are against it, again with the partisan split. But how about terms of employment? How about MMR like in some states? Health insurance. Why should I pay for the health insurance for somebody who doesn't get a vaccine? Points to ponder. That too, that's a big deal. Viruses for all influenza pandemics, and 75% of all influenza cases descended from the 1918 Spanish flu. This thing's going to mutate. We've got to be ready for the next one. By the way, bats carry thousands of different coronaviruses. I mentioned the mutation issue. And by the way, if we distributed the phase 2 trial, we would have saved between 100 and 150,000 lives. Okay, really interesting idea. Said, get ready. Produce vaccines for existing human infecting viruses. By the way, Moderna announced yesterday they're working on 3. Run trials for those 130, have everything ready, whip out that vaccine and immediately distribute it. Interesting idea. Okay, how about the consequences? Deep scars. Health education, finances, this partisan divide has greatly diminished our global influence, as has our case rate. Disruptions. How much of what's virtual is going to last? My guess is a lot. What does that say about the cities? Work at home, empty office buildings, people are already moving. Behaviors. I'm going to wear a mask in a subway. My wife and I love to cruise. We're not sure we'll ever go on a cruise ship. Things will improve. We'll get much better at the pandemic. I hope we can learn the behaviors. I'm not sure. Medical care generically will get better, and business productivity, everybody says, is going to go up. Role of the state. All the states are getting more powerful. Will this change the role and reach of the welfare state after the Great Depression? We'll invest more in public health, I hope. During World War II, there was a meeting at Bretton Woods that established our present world economic structure. Hopefully, the world will realize globalism is required and do something about pandemics and climate change. If you can't sleep, send me an email. And this is the document. It's seen as big. It's a bunch of images. Those are the chapters written, appendices to write, and a bunch of slides. Those interested in biochemistry, be sure to get the extra slides. There's really some cool stuff. Okay. I am done.
Okay, anyone who has any questions, raise your hand, and please remember to keep it to a simple question and no comments. Thank you. Okay, the first question goes to Mitch.
Hey, Bob, thanks a lot. That was awesome. And you covered a lot of territory in whatever it was, 45 minutes. You talked about the speed of the vaccine, the rollout, and how this was phenomenal. I forget all your precise words. The federal government's word is warp speed. And you know, it is truly amazing because we've had historically multiple years to get a vaccine out, and here we're talking about multiple months. And so my question is, you know, your thoughts on why we got such a faster rollout this time. I mean, it wasn't just simply that we threw more bodies at it in the laboratories.
Yeah, Mitch, I think it's two things. One, we were really lucky, and that the mRNA people who had never fielded a successful vaccine, never fielded a vaccine, had their platforms ready. Second, even though there's not a definition that anybody agrees to on a platform, there were platforms ready on the other viral vaccines. And then I think it's the crisis of war. It's the absolute crisis of war. You know, look at how quickly radar, the atomic bomb were invented. And, you know, these number of papers, you know, 125,000 papers, you know, journals all over the place. The world has coalesced and is cooperating. I'm sorry, that's another important point. Moderna is making all of its patents available free. So everybody's working together. It's astounding.
It gives us hope for a lot of other crises that are going to be on our horizon at some point.
I agree. I agree.
Bill Tittle, you're next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. My question is, how did you select the 3,500 papers you went through out of the 125,000?
Okay, I have several sources. One, there's a great little Australian English website that daily produces synopses of papers they find interesting. Mm-hmm. And they have about 10 people who do it. So I get a factor of 10 improvement. I scan most of them. then I have signed up on Lancet, Nature, Cell, Science, distribution lists. I look at those. And then I'm on 2, 3 other lists that list papers. And then, we read The Economist, New York Times, National Geographic. So you find them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm nuts, but I'm having a good time.
Walt Meisner?
Yes, that was a really great talk and a really good follow-up on 2 talks that the MIG group had. One was on modeling viruses and the other one was on SARS-2 in the early days. The question I have is, I've been following and reading this stuff, and I know for coronavirus, that's a common cold. Immunity lasts 3 months. For SARS-1, immunity lasts 2 years. They're a little bit unsure how long immunity would last for SARS-2. And you mentioned 1 year. The thing is, it seems that, maybe the world will never really get rid of SARS-2.
No. Okay, on modeling, and then let me comment on the antibody prevalence studies. One of the first talks I heard was a great talk at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Oh, I also should have mentioned, Mitch, I watch a bunch of videos on this stuff. And it was on modeling. And the guy opened, he said, the Ebola models forecast millions of deaths. Nobody will ever believe the models again. He then observed, we don't know what the numerator is or the denominator. We don't know how many people died. We don't know how many people got it. So the modeling is really, really tough. So far, the antibody studies, and I've read a slug of them, every antibody study says, well, as long as the interval we tested, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 7 months, 8 months, they're there. Okay, so that's the really good news. The Moderna one came out today. The SARS-1 vaccine, a paper came out of SARS-1 antibodies. The paper just came out that said it lasted even longer than 2 years. But we don't know. I quite frankly am worried more about the mutations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mike Martin?
Yeah, Bob, thanks for the talk. I wanted to just clarify something. You'd indicate the ACE2 receptor on cells is the key factor where the virus enters. And I think that's an important point. For those of us on blood pressure medication, namely suffixes of sartan, S-A-R-T-A-N, for the benefit of this audience, and prils, as in lisinopril or something like that, those drugs taken chronically block that receptor. There is some evidence, it's not unequivocal, but there is some evidence to suggest that those drugs could inhibit the virus penetration into a cell. Do you have any comments on this? I think it would benefit. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. If you're interested in that mechanism, it's in the backup slide and exactly what those drugs do. It has been one of those studies where it's been very uneven. Some people say it makes a difference. Some people say it doesn't make a difference. The biggest, most recent study said they do make a difference. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to email you that study and the details on them. The reason I had reviewed my medications with my doctor was exactly the blood pressure medications.
Yeah, can I just make one additional point? For those in the audience not familiar with these drugs, irbesartan, for example, S-A-R-T-A-N at the end, suffix, pril, lisinopril, the drugs that do not work, or at least no evidence of them, are drugs like metropropolol, which some of the people are on here, LOL, or Prin, which is amlodipine, or essentially a diuretic. It's only confined to this specific class of drugs. Thank you.
Right.
Nolan, you're next.
Nolan, your mic.
Gotta unmute.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe now I won't be able to answer your question.
Oh, you probably can. Diabetes is listed as number 4 on your list of comorbidities, and you talked about treated diabetes versus untreated diabetes. Could you educate us upon how
Sure.
important that is and
Yeah.
exactly what is treated diabetes versus untreated diabetes?
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Lost the sound.
Okay. By the way, I'm 6'2", I weigh 172 pounds. I'm diabetic. Okay. So and so I was really interested in diabetes, when I saw that popping up.
He's 6'2" and weighs 170 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first studies that came out just listed diabetes. And then there was a spectacular study in the Lancet that did something called a forest plot, which is you show a bunch of things going up there and you show their contributions to how bad it gets.
All right.
Okay. Does it help or does it get worse? And they broke down diabetes by how bad and whether it was treated. And if it was treated, it made no difference. So in other words, if you got, according to that study, if you got your sugar levels under control, it really didn't make a big difference. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And by the way, most of these papers have horrible graphics. It had the most gorgeous graphics making that point.
Ed Atkin, you're next, and you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I hope I'm unmuted now. Is there a big difference between Moderna and Pfizer other than the storage and how they work on a person's?
There are 2 excellent, just superb phase 3 reports from the New England Journal of Medicine. The Lancet report on AstraZeneca is a horrible report. It really surprised me. I was surprised it was published. According to those reports, AstraZeneca is better for us, better for the old folks. Okay, now whether we'll have a choice or not, I don't know. Both are great. So, if I were given a chance to get one, I'd take either. Let me see. Oh yeah, one thing that surprised me that I've been hunting for that was in the phase 2 reports is the antibody prevalence and the T cell prevalence by age was missing in both of those phase 3 reports. I'd like to see that, but I'm not sure I'll be able to.
Yeah, my mother does not want the Pfizer. She only wants Moderna. That's how she is. She's definitely in her respite care situation, and she doesn't she's not thrilled with Pfizer at all.
Talk to mom if she can get it sooner. Go sooner.
Yeah, she feels the Moderna is better. She's more concerned that it wasn't stored properly and all that.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, yeah. No. That's a separate issue, right?
Ron Hoke?
Thank you for a very interesting talk. At this point, what would you say are the most important things that we've learned so far from all the background scientific work that's been going on since the virus hit our shores?
Oh, that's wonderful. I think 2 things, and they get to what I think is going to happen next on viruses and cancer. And you may say 3. 1, our understanding of how to analyze these viruses and how they interact with us is unbelievable. There's a chart in the backup set that shows the protein-protein interaction, the SARS-29 proteins, with our 20,000 different ones. It shows all the interactions. So people know how to do that. People know how to exactly analyze a virus to find out its weak spot that isn't going to mutate. I think, particularly because of something called CRISPR, which I view the transistor of future medical care, CRISPR is popping up all over the place now. It's built on a bacteria's adaptive immune system. I think it's going to impact cancer much more quickly than has already happened. There are a couple of cancer trials already in it. And then finally, man, these people know how to pump this stuff out quickly now.
It's now 11:30. Are you able to stick around for a little while longer?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got another 4 or 5 questioners. Bob Miller?
Thank you, Bob. A wonderful talk. I have a question that's kind of future orientated. I live in North Carolina. Duke Medicine, I got my first vaccination last week.
Hey, how about that?
Scheduled for the next one, the end of the month.
Okay.
95% effective. But your comment about the need for a booster as we go forward in the future.
Yep.
Flu shots turn out to be like 50% effective, sometimes not even that.
Yep.
How do the mutations affect the effectiveness, and does it really require herd immunity, not so much as the booster?
Okay. There are a couple of questions in there, Bob. Nobody really knows what future mutations could do. There are some astoundingly clever ideas out there. From a paper from a few days ago, people identified a mutation on that receptor binding domain, the part, okay, that is 60 times more powerful than binding on the ACE2 receptor than this UK variant. Wow, okay.
Wow.
But now the clever idea, let's turn that into a drug. So it goes in and binds to all the ACE2 receptors by itself, not taking them out and keeping the bad guy from binding. Isn't that cute?
Yeah.
Okay, very cute. Now, I think a second question behind yours is, could you fly to North Carolina? Okay. I would wait until hopefully the Biden administration requires testing before flying. Even though you can get it, and even though the statistics are good, I mean, they're fantastic that you won't die from it, you still don't want to get it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Paul?
A quick question about this ultra cold requirement for the Pfizer vaccine. Is that, well, first of all, can you say in 2 words why that's required for that vaccine? And also, is that a common thing for other vaccines? I've never heard of that before.
No, other vaccines are typically, kept cold in the standard pharmacist, freezer, which is roughly the temperature of the Moderna one, by the way. The reason that Moderna is less than Pfizer is they thought about that doing their formulation. So they have a different formulation that holds the stuff that does what you want to do. There is an mRNA vaccine that is just starting a 36,500 person trial from a company called CureVac that just joined up with Bayer. That is an mRNA, just like these cold guys, but it will be room temperature. Should be available in about 7 months. Musk and Gates are investors. It's not testing old folks, which is consistent with my guess with Gates as an investor, and that he wants to get something to Africa that can be distributed. So it's not inherent in the mRNA. It's the way these guys built it. Long answer.
John Tomaszewski.
Yes. You know, just when I was watching TV on the New Year's Eve, I saw that Wuhan was having a huge party in the streets with very few people having masks. I've always thought what the United States has to do is really close down the economy for a period of time, allow people for 3 days to get all the food and what their needs are, and really crack down. And I think that would do more for stopping this virus than any other solution, except for vaccines, of course. What do you think?
Yeah, the experience, well, I agree, okay. The experience in spring and fall in Europe, though Britain is changing it, was that 8 days, 8 days of a really severe lockdown was enough. You know, that infectious period for most of the people isn't that long. Now, the problem with that infectious period, which is why I think Britain is closing it down, is some people are infectious for a very long time. I read of one case of a woman who was asymptomatic for 103 days and was infectious for 80 of them. So the question of how long is the tough one, but I agree. I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Herb Waddell.
Yeah, I was wondering, the virus is carried by bats, presumably. Do they suffer from it, or are they just carriers? And if they don't suffer from it, why not? Do they lack the receptors on their cells?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I have heard various speculations, as well as the recommendation, why don't we study bats? To understand the details of their immune system. I don't know the answer, and so far I haven't seen it.
Maybe they're only studied in Wuhan.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, they don't know how many coronaviruses these things carry. Based on what I've read and courses I've taken, watched, but that's a lot.
Okay, Griff Swift next.
Yeah, fascinating presentation, Bob. Thank you so much. You mentioned that the virus inserts itself into the DNA. Is there a chance that the DNA then gets damaged? And if so, could that then be passed on to offspring?
Okay, right now, so far what I've read is they're just parts of the DNA, particularly the N protein. The virus has 4 structural proteins. The spike that sticks out, the end that wraps up the RNA, and 2 that stick out of its surface, the E and the M. The other proteins are all non-structural and do the dirty, as it reproduces and makes us less effective. The N protein is the only one that's been found, potentially because of the bizarre way in which this thing replicates. I mean, it's just crazy. It makes our replication and protein building system look like kindergarten. I mean, it's amazing. Now, on the paper I read, I did not see that concern raised. I didn't see the HIV concern raised. Oh, by the way, HIV is one of the viruses that Moderna is going after. The other one is the seasonal flu.
Griff?
Once you've had the first inoculation, first vaccination, how important is it for you to get the second one when within the requested interval? I know there's been some attempts to say we can get you one and get more people vaccinated, but we may not be able to get the second shot back in time.
Yeah, boy, you have picked the where the dogs are fighting on that question. There is no good evidence to answer your question. You know, the trials were run quite systematically. They did check for antibody presence after the first shot, but you have the question that's been asked before about, you know, how quickly does it drop down? And I've heard people from the FDA think that Biden's proposal to release everything is the work of the devil. I've heard some really smart people who've been in this business long time say that's the best idea they've ever heard. So, don't know.
Okay.
Happy?
Sorry.
Happy, Stan? Happy?
Yeah, that is a great presentation. I have an app in my iPhone called COVID-19 New Jersey.
Yeah, that's the one I showed.
Okay, so if I cough on it, how does it work?
Oh, there are two ways it works. One, they ask you to input your symptoms daily. That helps the tracking. So, you know, I do that every day. You know, less than 1% of the users do that, but, you know, I'm weird. I do that kind of stuff. The way it should work, but I don't think it's really gonna work, is if you get near somebody who also has the app and is infected, and as that infected person, the state is notified, you will be notified that you were close to somebody. That's how it's supposed to work. By the way, it is working no place in the world. People just don't use it because they don't like computers, because they have silly privacy worries. You know, they're happy to let themselves be tracked on Google Maps, but not to make sure they don't kill somebody else. You know, I don't get it.
So you're supposed to just cough on it every day and
Yeah, I bring it up every day and give them my symptoms. They thank me. But yeah, I'm the most conservative person in the world. We have not been in a store since March 14th. When we met, it had to be 12 feet, no wind, no calls. I mean, you know, we're nuts.
thank you.
Yep.
Dick Aiken?
Bob, I have a question about the evolution of viruses. I understand that the natural evolution of a virus is that it will become more transmissible, but then its death rate, its fatality rate will go down because that way it'll have more hosts to travel among. Can you comment on what's known about how this virus might evolve?
to your first question, I have not read an answer to your first question, but evolutionary pressure says that makes sense, right? You know, I want to duplicate. There's something else that happens called Mueller's ratchet, which is a systemic evolution of asexually producing pathogens, you know, bacteria and virus. Statistically, they get weaker, which is kind of interesting. Now, if you think of the Spanish flu, it has gotten weaker. But to your, so that would be, but let's see, does it spread more? It hadn't spread more, but it has gotten less deadly. So that would be consistent with your observation.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay, since there are no further questions, I'll turn the mic back to Al Aho.
Bob, thank you very much for an excellent and comprehensive talk on COVID-19. You've confirmed two of my suspicions. The first is that I thought a talk on COVID-19 would be much more interesting than a talk on software, and you confirmed that. What you also confirmed is that, having known you as long as I have, you never do anything in half measures, and your talk certainly demonstrates this. And I learned much more from your presentation than I did from trying to read your 900 pages of notes that you had written. So thank you again for very much for coming and giving us this presentation. The Old Guard has two ways of thanking its speakers. The first is by giving them a certificate of appreciation, which you should see on your screen.
That I do.
The notable aspect of this certificate is the picture of the orchid. And since you were a resident of Summit, you perhaps know that Summit was the orchid capital of the East back in the 1930s when the Old Guard was formulated. So we put the orchid on our certificate of appreciation. And the second form of thanking our speaker is with an old-fashioned Old Guard salute. So I would like everyone to unmute and give you our Old Guard salute. Thank you, Bob.
Yay! Thank you.
Stand